My guest tonight, John LeMay, has some tall tales to tell. And those tales involve vampires, dogmen, werewolves, space monsters, and other creatures of the night. See you in about 5 minutes. Grab your popcorn and snacks. Find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust, turn out the lights and open your minds. The journey is about to begin. Good evening, everybody. How's everyone doing today? Well, I hope you said fine. I'm doing fine, too. Welcome to California Haunts Radio. My name is Charlotte. I'm going to be your host for the next hour or so. We've got a great guest tonight. We're kind of shifting gears with this guest, which is kind of fun. I like to shift gears. Anyway, I'm also the owner of the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team, based out of Sacramento, and we are 45 strong up and down the state of California. Which means, for you, if you have a paranormal need, or you think you have a paranormal need in your home or office, we can get to you, because there's somebody in practically every county. And if we're not in every county, we're within 3 or 4 counties away that we can get to you. So look us up. You can look us up at CaliforniaHaunts.org, CaliforniaHauntsRadio.com. You can find me on Facebook via my name. You can find California Haunts on Facebook. It's really easy to find us. Also, I want to announce I'm teaching. Let me get this out here. Sometimes I got to read notes too. I'm teaching a psychic development class on Saturday, September 3rd at 5 p.m. Pacific, and that's going to be a basic psychic development class, an entry into psychic development. And if you want details, head over to the California Haunts Meetup page. Join up with our meetup because it's all free. Okay, there's no cost to join up with the meetup, and that's where I make all the major announcements for classes and stuff now. Also, if you're interested and you've already been through the class, or you're more advanced with your abilities, I'm teaching a psychic development class 2 the following weekend on September 10th at 5 p.m. Pacific. And that's a little more advanced class where we focus on different psychic skills, because not every psychic can do everything. They might be good at, clairsentience or clairaudience, but they're not good at other stuff. And the other way to find that out is to practice. Practice. So the second class goes through that, has exercises, and we can kind of hone in on what your skills are. Okay, is that cool? All right. Anyway, welcome. If you're watching tonight from Facebook, please, thank you. If you're watching from Facebook, please, like our show. Okay, like our show. If you're watching from YouTube, we're looking for subscribers. So there's a little ghost in the bottom right-hand corner, the magnifying glass and a Sherlock Holmes hat on. Please click on that to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We've got more than 350 videos sitting over there, different topics. I think you'll find something that you like, right? Same thing with Twitter. Same thing with TikTok. Same thing with Twitch. If you're listening and you like the show, become a friend. Either become a friend or just click on that like button. We're looking for likes. Okay. And also, may I add, I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. Oh yes, if you're watching the show and you like it during the show, share it. Share it with your friends. Let everybody know we're on the air. Okay? Share it with your friends. Because we're looking to get the word out more and more about this show. And again, I'm thanking everybody because this month has been tremendous. As far as downloads on the podcast, the word's getting out. Our numbers at YouTube are really good too right now. So the word about the show is getting out. As you guys know, YouTube shows us no love. I don't know why, but we kind of get lost in the algorithms there. But anyway, tonight's guest, I'm nut about the Old West. I really am, and I loved it. I remember taking a trip up with Nancy Matz and visiting Nancy Matz when she lived up in Tucson, and we went out to Tombstone, and I just had a blast up in Tombstone, walking around with Nancy Matz, looking and listening about the stories about the legends and stuff out there. Our guest tonight is going to tell us about legends that I never even thought of the Old West, even though it must have happened, but you don't hear about it. Vampires, dogmen, aliens, that kind of thing, stories from the Old West. So he's written a few books on that, and I think we're going to have fun with him tonight. His name is John LeMay, and like I said, I'm really excited to have him on. So you know what? I'm going to shut up and get him on. How's that sound?
Hello, Charlotte. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. How are you today?
Oh, I'm doing good. I'm excited to be on here, and I'm glad you're getting more followers.
Yeah, we're getting there. It's the last 3 months has been just a big boom. Suddenly, I don't know why, but keep doing it, guys. Keep doing it. So tell me about you, sir.
Well, I've done about 40 books now, and then partly why I say that is if you ask me a question about the most current book that just came out, I probably won't be able to come up with the answer real quick because of all that information in my head. And it's kind of like the current book that just came out. I probably wrote a year or two ago, and then it takes a while to edit them and get them released and get the cover art. But like, here's the one I think you had listened to on the Monsters podcast,
Mm-hmm.
Cowboys and Monsters. But it didn't start. That's the newest book. But what it started with was the Cowboys and Aliens movie back in 2011. My friend Noe Torres is a ufologist in Texas, and he and I both basically had the same idea that with the movie coming out, we should ride the hype wave and just do a book on the real UFOs of the Old West because there were quite a few. And that's what got the ball rolling. Then I did kind of a spin off sequel with dinosaurs and cryptozoology in the Old West. And just I got to having a lot of fun. So I thought, well, I wonder if they have any vampire stories from the Old West. And to my shock, they had quite a few. So, but yeah, I think I've been doing this for about the past 10 years now, as far as like the paranormal Old West stuff.
How do you research this stuff? I mean, are there written accounts, or how do you find this info?
So I'm very spoiled as a modern researcher. I really like to pay my respects to Jerome Clark and his books because I know poor Jerome Clark probably had to go through the microfiche and he had to work really hard to transcribe these old newspaper articles
Mm-hmm.
because there's tons of these newspaper articles. And today, somebody like me, I learned the right keywords to search in newspaper.com or newspaper archive is the one I use.
Mm-hmm.
And you even have a software that you can highlight the words, and if the typeface isn't too bad, it'll actually copy them. So I mean, my job is pretty minimal. And once I get the articles, I just try and figure out, was the witness real? Where else can we find this witness in the historical record? Was it even a real person? Are there corroborating articles? Things like that. So it's like being a cold case detective,
Mm-hmm.
and it's difficult, but it's fun.
Well, and then as I'm reading, because I'm reading the Legend and Haunting of Lizzie Borden, and when I'm finding this, because being a journalist, right, working in newspapers, they wrote a lot differently back then too.
Hmm. Yeah, very wordy. And so is Lizzie Borden? Is that where the rock group? Since you brought her up, is that where the rock group Thin Lizzy got their name?
I don't know.
Yeah,
I
I've
have
always
no
wondered
idea.
about that.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I know in this book I'm reading, there's a lot of newspaper, sections taken from the newspapers, and it's a lot. It's a lot different from what we do,
Yeah.
normally. So tell me about vampires. I mean, tell me about vampires in the old west. What is that like? Did they look similar to what we think vampires look like, or how they look?
One of them did. The one that I would say is closest to Dracula is they have a
Mm-hmm.
story about Saint Germain supposedly living in New Orleans in 1904, and a girl flung herself from his balcony because she claimed that he tried to bite her on the neck and drink her blood. And the next day, when the police returned to his house, he had vacated the property, and they found wine bottles that had mixtures of wine and human blood in them. And so, I mean,
Oh.
or not Count Germain, what is it, Saint Germain?
Mm-hmm.
Um, in most circles, is looked at as more of a benevolent figure, but this is
Mm-hmm.
probably one of the only stories where he's like an evil figure. Um, and it doesn't have a lot behind it that I know of, but he's the one that I would say is most like a movie vampire like Dracula, because they also said that Saint Germain after that moved to a castle in Transylvania and stuff like that. But no, typically the vampires of the old west that I found were usually they were like wild men, just kind of roaming around the ranges. The most popular one is a story from Nebraska from 1895 or so, I think. They claim that this very strong wild man was running along the ranges and he would wrestle cattle down with his bare hands and he would drain their blood. And he supposedly got in a fight with one of the cowboys. And, initially I just figured that was probably, one of those made up for entertainment stories.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but as I got to looking around, I discovered, sorry, there. I discovered though that there was a corroborating article from, I think it was the neighboring state of Iowa,
Mm-hmm.
where they too had had a vampire attack recently from a guy who had escaped from an asylum, and it all happened within 3 months. And I kind of calculated the mileage and was like, well, he could have traveled that far in 3 months pretty easily.
Mm-hmm.
So that story about the Nebraska vampire definitely intrigued me.
Well, I just find it interesting because I've read a lot of Old West stuff. Over the years, my dad, was really into it. I had all the Time Life books and all that stuff. And I've never seen anything on vampires or anything because as a ghost hunter up here in the Gold Country, I'm forever doing research and stuff. I'm getting like Tommy knockers and all this because we're up in the hills. But I've never heard anything about vampires or anything like that.
Yeah, and so actually, um, I ended up doing a whole spin-off series. I've got it right here. So, I did this book first, Cowboys and Monsters. I really thought
Mm-hmm.
that all of it would fit in this one book, which is close to 400 pages or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I just kept digging up more and more stories, and I figured out there was too many for one book, and it would have been about 800 pages, maybe more. And so I decided to just do the best stories and the most Western stories in that Cowboys and Monsters. But I have three new books that are just devoted, each one to a different monster, more or less. So I've got one, it's just the cowboy and vampire story. So it
Mm-hmm.
has stories from that Cowboys and Monsters book, plus at least 60% of it is brand new stories. Like I did the Vampire Witches of Mexico. I can never pronounce their names, but that was a big deal back in the 1950s. They actually launched a government investigation into rural Mexico because they had so many infant death certificates that said that the baby was quote sucked by the witch,
Wow.
and that the baby was drained of blood in the night by a witch, and it was a really big full scale investigation. So like I have that in there. I did a book just devoted to the mummies, so you can see the David E. George, John Wilkes Booth mummy. That's who that is.
Mm-hmm.
And then lastly, I did the werewolf book, which I called it Cowboys and Dogmen. So those are all out right now. I just haven't promoted them real hard yet.
Some of these stories, I mean, when you think about these stories, like I've interviewed people about Paul Bunyan and those legends.
Mhm.
I mean, are these fireside stories that these guys would tell each other to scare each other, or do you think that they actually saw stuff?
So most of these I got from newspaper articles, and the problem with those newspaper articles, back then they would write articles purely for entertainment, and they would sandwich them in between the real articles, so you could
Mm-hmm.
never actually tell what was made up and what
Right.
wasn't. I mean, skeptics will take it for granted that any article about a dinosaur or a vampire is just made up. But people like us who really read into it, get to where we can kind of tell what seems legit and what doesn't. So it's unfortunate there are so many fake articles, but I think at least half of them might be talking about something that really happened.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I was just thinking about those little comic books that they would sell too, for that the kids would read about Billy the Kid or whatever, to romanticize these people, things
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, so I'm from Roswell, which is actually not too far. I know everybody thinks of aliens when they hear Roswell, but Roswell was also one of the stomping grounds of Billy the Kid. It wasn't too far from the town of Lincoln where they did all the fighting. Not terribly far from Fort Sumner either, where he died. So Roswell definitely has its share of Western history. And we even have a funny tie between the UFO crash and Billy the Kid. So some people will know Pat Garrett was the sheriff who killed
Mm-hmm.
Billy the Kid.
Mm-hmm.
Well, many years later in 1908, Pat Garrett was himself shot, some people say assassinated, and he was shot by Jesse Wayne Brazel, who was a cousin or something to Mac Brazel, who found the UFO debris in 1947.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That is very interesting. Wow, small world, small world. So, as you went through these files, like you say, you had to sort through which ones you felt were real, which ones were fake. I mean, was it very time consuming for you?
Yes, and even though I say that, typically, so like if I come across a really interesting article,
Hmm.
I'll still include it, and I'll be honest though, and just tell the reader I don't think this one's real, but I
Hmm.
mean it's too good not to print, so let's go ahead and read it anyways. Um, and it's always disappointing when I can't dig anything up
Hmm.
on these articles. You know, sometimes when that happens, I'll just print them and kind of, uh, leave them out there for the reader to see what they think, just because they're entertaining. But like I said, it is a lot of fun when you can actually latch on to at least one name from the article, the witness name, and learn their history and learn that
Right.
they were at least a real person. And I mean, even then, that doesn't prove that any of it happened, you know,
Right. Right. Right.
because those
But
people, they like to play practical jokes, even if they were
mhm,
good people, so it's hard to tell.
it is hard to tell. But when you think about it, though, in the big picture, the Native Americans always had legends about this
Hmm.
stuff. The dogmen, even probably vampires, for all we know.
Yeah.
So it makes a lot of sense that maybe they might have actually existed, and we just us in our society think, ugh, whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's what I like to tell the skeptics, because skeptics think they're so smart and they're better than everyone. But it's like, to me, it's like common sense. If you see a Bigfoot on a cave painting way over in Africa, and then you see it across the continents worldwide, and it's like the pre-internet, pre-information age, pre-newspaper, pre-telephone, all these different continents were seeing the same creatures
Mm-hmm.
and have basically the same stories. I mean, common sense would tell you, well, they all saw the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
They're not
Mm-hmm.
all going to come up with the same fairy tale. That's weird.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I absolutely think, the fact that we see, like I said, a cave painting, a Bigfoot, Loch Ness monster, whatever, and then we still see it today. It's just, to me, that's the proponent for their existence.
And how many? I mean, just off the top of your head, how many vampire stories were you able to come across for this?
Um, I think I filled about 200 pages in the vampire book, but I don't remember how many cases that is. But like, there was a pretty interesting one from Brooklyn in the 1870s. That it was a pretty detailed article that was really interesting. Let's see, I did about 24 chapters, so I guess that's about
Hmm.
24 solid, vampire stories in,
Right.
in this particular book here.
Right. That's incredible.
Yeah, and there's probably still more that I just missed.
Right, but I agree with you. It's hard to tell the truth from the fiction on this because
Mhm.
obviously you weren't there, and then it was hard because they did tell stretchers. What about the monsters? Let's talk about some of the monsters. What's
Yeah, so
considered monsters?
monsters. What do I cause well, um cryptids, I suppose. I
Okay.
really enjoy cryptids. Like I said, this series kind of started with I called it Cowboys and Saurians, which was devoted to dinosaurs and giant reptiles. Particularly the 1890 Tombstone Thunderbird incident. Funny thing was, so like I said, 2011 I did the Real Cowboys and Aliens with Noe Torres, and then I wanted to do the dinosaur book. And I really thought the dinosaur book would barely scrape by. I thought, I'll be lucky to get 120 pages or something and eke out a little book. Well,
Hmm.
as I started to delve into these articles, there were so many, I figured out I could do a whole series. So I kind of started categorizing them as I would collect them. Like I would set aside the Ice Age type monsters like saber-toothed tigers, woolly mammoths, the old cave bears, because they would see those as well back in the pioneer days.
Hmm.
And so I would set those aside, and then I'd just do the dinosaurs, and I might set them aside by region, like I did basically dinosaurs in the old South.
Hmm.
I called that one Southerners and Saurians. So I've done about 4 or 5 of the dinosaur books now. I'm working on one of dinosaur encounters in Australia, because the Australia is kind of like the old West back
Right.
in its heyday. Similar thing with cowboys and cattle, and they have some interesting dinosaur stories. So a ton of remnant dinosaurs stories just from all across America and South America and Australia. It's really interesting.
Well, even now, like the Alaska, I don't know if it's the Alaskan Triangle or one of those Alaskan things on Discovery. They were talking about how they were driving down this road in this area and they saw these dinosaurs,
Hmm.
smaller dinosaurs, kind of like the size of the raptors, I guess. But that's
Yeah.
what people kept saying because they had like 10 people that had actually seen these things. So it makes a lot of sense because even back then, when you think about it, all the wide open plains, especially back then, anything could be existing in those caves, down way down in those mines or
Yeah.
whatever.
I'm glad you brought up the little dinosaur because I actually met a man here in Roswell who saw that they call them Colorado River dinosaurs because they see them kind of in the Four Corners area. Um, but he saw one here in Roswell, which I think is interesting, because you think Roswell can only have one strange thing, that being the
Right,
aliens, but it has all sorts of interesting things.
right. Well, actually, people I've talked to about that topic seem to think that where there is UFO activity, you're going to get these strange creatures.
Yeah, definitely. I believe in the window area thing where they all conglomerate together, kind of like what John Keel talked about with Mothman and the Men in Black and
Hmm.
Injured Cold and just all of it. It seems to all be connected in some strange way.
What's one of the monsters from the Old West that stands out to you?
Well, I don't know. He's more of a human monster, but I was really shocked in the Federal Writers Project. Someone interviewed a man who claimed he met Jack the Ripper tending bar in Benson, Arizona. And he claimed that this bartender claimed that he was Jack the Ripper who had escaped from England to America. And he got in a bar fight and there was a shooting. And they claimed that his deathbed confession was that he was really Jack the Ripper. And here was the knife he used to kill all these people. So, I mean, if that was a real deathbed confession, you have to think to yourself, why would anybody lie on
Hmm.
the deathbed? Usually they tell the truth. And I mean, why would they want to be known as Jack the Ripper if they were lying?
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
an odd thing. So I guess the question there is, did that deathbed confession really happen? Or
Right.
did this interview subject just make it up? But that's why I like these stories. It's really not on me. It's not on me to prove them. I just put them out there and say, well,
Right.
I mean, here's the pros and cons as to why it maybe did or didn't happen.
Well, it does make sense with Jack the Ripper because everything died down, and then things started to happen over in the U.S. There were reports of similar crimes in the U.S. So, I mean, the Scotland Yard was thinking that, yeah, he
Mhm.
escaped England and went over to the U.S. So what you're saying is perfectly plausible.
Yeah, and then oh gosh, I think my favorite story though from Cowboys and Monsters. He's not really a monster. I guess my definition of monster for that book was I was thinking of the Universal horror films,
Hmm.
and they always had the mummies. So in real life, there's not really any stories of mummies coming back to life or anything
Hmm.
that fantastic. But I did find a story about the guy David E. George, who kind of like the Jack the Ripper thing. David E. George, when he died, claimed he was John Wilkes Booth, and this was about 1904, somewhere around there. And so he had committed suicide with arsenic, and then the embalmer used his chemicals to embalm him, and because of the arsenic, it's like they mummified him,
Okay.
and so he turned into a mummy. And when they learned that he had claimed to be John Wilkes Booth, the short version is they made him a circus attraction, and he just toured all over America. And there's an interesting story that the mummy was cursed, and it caused a train wreck and the train was carrying freak circus animals, and it's just kind of an odd, interesting story that actually is true.
Hmm.
And of course, doesn't mean he was John Wilkes Booth or that it was a curse, but
Right.
it seems like something out of a film, so it's interesting.
I was going to ask you, did you come across, and I don't know if it happened in the early 1900s or the 1800s, the story of the young Bigfoot?
So I do have a file saved away to maybe do a Cowboys and Bigfoot type
Hmm.
book one day, and maybe I have that in there because there's a lot of pioneer period Sasquatch articles
Yeah.
too. So I might. I just haven't looked in a while, and it's not fresh in my mind.
Yeah, because there was a report that they had captured a baby, a younger one, and they took it on tour for the sideshow, and then nobody knows what happened to it. But they swear up and down that people would see this thing, on tour.
Was
So if you
that the
come across,
Alaskan one? Was his name like Jacko or something?
yeah,
And it was
yeah, yeah,
okay.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I have heard of that one.
yeah.
That's a great
So
story. Yeah.
it's interesting. I mean, it's interesting to me. Let's talk about Dogman now. I mean, here's these
Yeah.
guys. They're out, well, like you see in Australia, they're still doing this. They're staying overnight out in the middle of nowhere on their horses, keeping an eye on the flocks and whatnot. And these things appear to start to eat their sheep. Is that kind
Yeah.
of along what we're talking about, or what's the sightings like for the dogmen?
Yep. So I live in New Mexico, and we have something called skinwalkers, and it's a really taboo thing. There
Mhm.
would actually be people, just like in the old Universal horror movies, where they're outside of Dracula's castle and they won't even say the name. Um, so it's basically a Native American Navajo um, idea, or maybe I shouldn't call it idea.
Mhm.
I'm just trying to think of the right word to use. It's Navajo witchcraft, and of course the Navajo really frown upon it, and they kind of tried to keep it secretive, and it just leaked out through popular culture and things like that because it's so interesting because it basically is kind of a Navajo werewolf. It's just
Mhm.
not quite like in the movies where they get bitten and they change. In the Navajo folklore, the witch just wears whatever animal skin it wants to turn into.
Mhm.
And that's how they induce the transformation. And I think the other aspect of it is they have to kill a close blood relative to actually um, gain all of their powers or whatever it is. But it was a very serious issue. A lot of Navajos believe in skinwalkers still.
Mhm.
And in 1878, they had something called the Navajo Witch Purge over in Arizona, where the Navajo were just really suffering because they had just returned from the long walk to New Mexico. They were forced to do the long walk in the early 1860s to a place called Fort Sumner. And then in 1868, they were allowed to finally return home to Arizona, but they were just in really bad shape because it was such a harsh experience. And they had a lot of cattle deaths and things like that. And it's tough to say if skinwalkers were really to blame
Mhm.
or if it was more along the lines of something like the Spanish Inquisition, where all sorts of people got accused of being witches when really only a handful of them probably were actual witches. But they had basically they would execute these accused skinwalkers, and I think in total 40 people or so got executed in 1878 under the suspicion of being a witch or a skinwalker. So it was a very real thing. So the skinwalkers of all the North American werewolves are probably the ones that fascinate me the most. And actually, from what I understand, all of the werewolf stories are similar to that, in that there's not a werewolf bite. It's always they make a pact with the devil or whatever kind of magic, and they wear the animal skin, and that's how they transform. I never ever found a story where somebody got bit and they turned into a werewolf later.
Interesting. Now, a question I have for you is that, and I know these whole newspapers, these guys would take liberties with their writing to pump it up, but if you've looked in the Navajo legends or the Hopi legends or whatever, do the descriptions match between what the cowboys are seeing and what the Native Americans are seeing, or is there a difference?
So what's interesting is it's really only the Navajo and the Native Americans would see the skinwalkers. Not
Okay.
really too many cowboys ever talked about them.
Mhm.
Nowadays, you will get non-Navajo that maybe they're driving around that area in kind of northern New Mexico, and they will claim to see kind of a half wolf, half human type creature running alongside their car. There's a lot of stories of that. And I'm sure everybody's heard of the famous Skinwalker Ranch of Utah,
Right.
which actually doesn't have that many skinwalkers. It's more of a UFO type area. And what is kind of like you were saying about window areas earlier, because the Skinwalker Ranch has had UFOs, it's had the skinwalkers, it's had even at least one dinosaur sighting there. So it's pretty crazy.
I just find the skinwalkers to be really fascinating because they are half
Yeah.
man, half wolf, and I just wonder how, like the story. I mean, like you say, you see these stories, and it's either a bite or the full moon, and then and they change body form. And the stuff that you've read, like you've already determined that it's not a bite that causes them. What about the transformation, or if there's any
I
reports of transformations?
I think no one has lived to like tell of the transformation itself. It's one of those things where they'd have to be like an ex skinwalker or something like that. But I don't think there is such a thing as an ex skinwalker. I think once they become one, it's like they're permanently off, and I don't know what you'd call it, some other realm, or they just keep to themselves.
Mhm.
But yeah, I don't think anyone's ever lived to tell what the transformation looks like. And also, the Navajo are very private. They'd be angry we were talking about this at all. But I mean,
Right.
it's already out there.
Hmm.
Uh, people basically kind of know what it is. And that's why there's probably so much misinformation about it. Is they don't really share a lot about it. They keep it hush hush, and to them, it's kind of like bad luck to talk about it.
Hmm. The other thing too is it's like with any story. It starts out with the Navajo, and then maybe somebody else sees it, and then they tell about it, but then they're going to add a couple more things to make it
Hmm.
more scary, and then it's getting passed down through the
Yeah.
ages like that, where it's more scary. Do you think when you compare the Navajo legends with the legends of the Cowboys, is there a difference between the two?
So
Have you?
I was kind of sad. I didn't find a whole lot of good cowboy like werewolf encounters. Like a lot of them came from, I noticed, areas where the French settled. More like
Okay.
in Detroit, there were quite a few. There's quite a few in the South, like Kentucky's land
Uh-huh.
between the lakes. Um, Now the Michigan Dog Man is kind of interesting. It seems like a traditional movie werewolf more than like a skinwalker.
Hmm.
Um, but you know me, I've got to flip through my book real quick and think, what am I forgetting about here? I found a really interesting story I liked because I wanted to find a silver bullet story because that
Okay.
seemed to me to be something from a film,
Hmm.
and I didn't find anything really silver bullet related. But I found this cool story from Canada about a it was more of a were-coyote. It was a man who turned into a coyote, and a miner shot him with a bullet made of gold, and that's what killed him. I thought that's a pretty cool old west, werewolf story.
That is cool. I mean, it doesn't necessarily either have to be the Old West either. Like you say, the stories in the South, because I know there's a lot of swamp beings.
Hmm.
Especially when you get back to New Orleans, where you got the swamps, and then even Florida's Everglades. There's all kinds of stuff that's out there.
Hmm. Yeah, and this book too. I have some like just canine cryptids in general. That definitely wouldn't really be a werewolf, but it's a canine cryptid, so I thought it was cool. My favorite thing I learned definitely came from Robert Bito's. I hope I said his last name right. I think it's Bitto. He has a website called Mexico Unexplained, and he did a big write up on the Mexican equivalent of the hellhound called a cadejo. And what I thought was so cool is that everywhere else there's only the evil hellhounds, but
Right.
Mexico has heavenly hounds called the white cadejo. That's like a hound from heaven. That's
Mhm.
good and it fights the hellhounds. I just thought that was so cool.
That is really cool. And then you just made me think about the chupacabra.
Yeah.
You're talking about Mexico. There's so much out there, and there's so much, and I admire you for going through this stuff and looking it up like you have, because there's just so much out there to dig up and find. So
Oh,
much
well, thank
information
you.
to sort
I'll say I admire the people that buy my books because that enables me to actually do this and spend my time. Because this used to be a hobby,
through. Hmm.
but now like you said, I'm at 40 books. So I mean, so thank you everyone who buys my books. That's how I'm able to keep looking into this stuff. And I'm really not that great of a researcher. I don't think I'm good at. Uh, I only write books that I want to read. I
Okay.
guess is what I would say. I never write a book that I don't want to read myself.
Hmm.
And so that's why I thought, I'd really, I think what started it is I really like the movie Valley of Guanji. And I just thought, there's a lot of real stories like that. So I just want to compile them all into one book. And that's kind of what got the ball rolling. And a lot of people, they think like me, they're interested in the same thing. And so thank you, anyone that enjoys my books. I appreciate it.
When you think about these stories again, you think about these guys that are out like watching the cattle, and it's lonely at night. Is there anything in your books or any research that you've done where it's multiple sightings, with a group of people seeing something?
My, so it's pretty rare that I come across anything kind of new, so to speak. I mean, usually like Lauren Coleman or somebody like that has already covered it years ago. So the only thing I feel like I've ever kind of pieced together, or one of the only things that I pieced together on my own that I don't think anyone else ever wrote about, was the Kentucky dog eater. That's what it was called, was the dog eater, because for some reason it was a predator that went after mostly dogs. And it was always just this big monstrous dog-like creature. Sometimes it would like tear the heads off of the carcass and just take the head away. Sometimes it would suck the blood and drain the body. But it was just this weird animal that ran wild through Kentucky and into Tennessee for like a span of about 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And truthfully, it was probably multiple predators all blamed for the same killings, but in that mix, probably somewhere was the real dog eater, which was some freak animal of some sort, whether it's just like a genetic mutation or there was something supernatural about it. But the dog eater was probably the one I was the most intrigued with, just because it was one that nobody else had covered before, and I kind of got to be the first, to the best of my knowledge. Maybe I'm not, but
Well, that is really cool. Yeah, that's definitely good. It's definitely a plus. What creature stands out to you the most?
like in terms of like the monsters, like the vampires and the werewolves, or the dinosaurs, or
The vampires and the werewolves.
the vampires and the werewolves. Um, hmm. There's so many. I mean, that vampire from Nebraska is pretty hard to beat.
Mm-hmm.
Because like I said, there was an actual corroborating story for it. So I think, yeah, the vampire of Nebraska back in 1896 or 1895, whenever it was,
Mm-hmm.
that might be my favorite from this particular book here.
Absolutely. And as far as the when we talk about the dinosaurs and stuff, what stands out to you with the stories?
So I think my favorite dinosaur story that I actually believe is also one of the most exciting ones. And I don't want to say exciting, because if you actually were there, you wouldn't call it exciting. You'd call it a tragedy. But I mean, it sounds like something from a film. It happened in Crosswicks, Ohio, in the 1880s, and basically the people there described something kind of like a raptor, kind of like from the Jurassic Park movies. It was just a really fleet, bipedal, carnivorous, lizard monster that
Mm-hmm.
attacked two boys and killed one of them, and like drug it away. I guess apparently bit him to death. Then it ran off and it hid inside of a hollowed out tree. And I think they had like chopped the tree down, then it ran away and they lost sight of it. But that was one, you would think that's a made up story, but there's a lot to validate it. The witnesses, we were, they're all people that you can track down and prove that they were real.
Mm-hmm.
There were other sightings in the area. And what's really weird, though, is this the idea that the monster would run into the hollowed out tree,
Right.
because there's a Native American tribe somewhere in Oklahoma that had a legend of a lizard monster that that had matched the same description as the Crosswicks monster, and it liked to live in hollowed out trees, and there was no communication between this Native American tribe in Oklahoma and these newspaper writers in Ohio in the 1880s. I mean, it's just such an odd coincidence, so it kind of lends some credence to the story.
See, that's where I agree with you 100% in that
Mhm.
when you can get a hold of a story like that and you're able to compare it with, say, something the Native Americans have seen or in their legends, that's what makes it nice and credible.
Yeah.
That is awesome. Let's talk. Speaking of which, you kind of touched on that earlier, the Thunderbird,
hmm
the big birds. What stories have you heard about that?
There's
People
just so
saying.
many, and there's basically two different types of thunderbirds. First is the basically the giant eagle. Then
Mm-hmm.
the second one, which probably you and I are more interested in, is a remnant pterodactyl. And the famous story is that back in 1890, two unnamed cowboys were riding through the Huachuca Desert outside of Tombstone, Arizona, and supposedly they saw this animal that they described as kind of being like a crocodile with wings, and they shot it down. And the story goes they drug it back into Tombstone and took a photograph of it. And then today, there's all sorts of people that claim they saw the photograph one time, but they can't find it. And that's really the most famous Old West dinosaur story there is, probably just because it happened
Mhm.
so close to
Mhm.
Tombstone, and it's as opposed to anywhere else.
Right, right, right. I find those interesting too because
Hmm.
even today people are still claiming that they're seeing that stuff. You know,
Yeah,
that they're
and
seeing 'em.
and the Tombstone one also has a lot of corroboration because they would talk also about the Elizabeth Lake monster of California, which basically had the same description, and they said it left the lake uh, just a few months before the Tombstone story broke, and it was flying east, in that direction. And then somebody else recently found a third article where the Tombstone Thunderbird was seen, I think somewhere in like around San Diego, California, around the same time, and it's very interesting.
It is very interesting. Now let's talk about the South because the South doesn't necessarily have to be cowboy stories. But the South, I mean, with all the bayous and everything back there, I mean, anything could be back in the deep woods or in the bayous. What types of creatures are back there? I know there's like the swamp, the Bigfoot type swamp creatures, but what else is there?
Well, with every one of those cowboy dinosaur books, I like to find a certain creature to spotlight, to put on the cover of the book. Like first book is Tombstone Thunderbird. The
Hmm.
Ice Age book, I did the Ceratosaurus of the Yukon that supposedly existed, but for the Southerners and Saurians, I did Lizard Man because they had a lizard man sighting almost 100 years prior to the famous 1987 lizard man sighting. And uh, so I always mix up North and South Carolina. You know what I mean? I just they're both Carolinas to me. I don't remember what do you remember which Carolina it was
I
for lizard
don't.
man?
I don't remember at all. No,
Yeah,
I get
people.
confused
Yeah,
too. The only thing
people
I
like
know about
yeah.
is my father was stationed at Kitty Hawk, and that's the only North
Okay.
Carolina. That's the only Carolina I know.
It makes us sound like we don't know what we're talking about, but I mean, we have a lot of information in our head. It's hard to remember. So,
Right.
but yeah, whichever Carolina it was, that had the Blizzard Man thing in 1987, 88, whenever it was. There was another one in 1892, not too far from the, I think it's Brownsville, is where the Lizard Man was seen, and this one wasn't too far away. The only difference was they called it Alligator Man instead of Lizard Man, but the description, the size, everything is almost identical to the Lizard Man of the 1980s. So I just thought that was so cool that I was able to find. I shouldn't say I found that article. I mean, lots of people found that article way
Hmm.
before I ever did. But I mean, I was glad I was able to find it for the book on the South because to me that's what set it apart.
Now, for people that don't know what a lizard man looks like, can you describe it?
So basically, no different than like a reptilian type alien, except for it has a bigger tail, I guess. But I mean, it's just basically like a man with scales and a tail, and or you could even say it's like a Bigfoot that looks like a lizard too, possibly, kind of the same size.
And what types of thing does this thing? What types of stuff does this thing do?
So it's very aggressive and very mean. The guy that saw it back in 1987, I think his name was like Christopher Davis or I can't remember his name. But he said it attacked his car and like clawed up the bumper and jumped on the roof of the car as he tried to drive away. So it was like really aggressive. So it was very scary. And then more recently, they had a couple within the last 10 years that found their car, like they found the grill torn to shreds and they blamed that on Lizard Man and stuff like that. So, I mean, I think Lizard Man is seen fairly infrequently in that area, but the 1987 sighting is the only really good one that got a ton of attention.
That's interesting because you'd think. I mean, like back there, I'm not cutting down the South or anything because there's some beautiful areas in the South. But I mean, when the people over like in California think about the South, they're thinking about the bogs and all this stuff that's back there. And the thing that comes to mind to me is the boggy creature,
Hmm.
and stuff like that because I know, like, yeah, I had a gentleman on from Florida who was talking about some legends over in Florida, and it's just interesting that there's all these legends of all these creatures all over.
Hmm. Yeah, the South book was fun just because I found some really different stuff outside of the usual dinosaurs. I think I found giant mosquitoes, some giant leeches. What else? Just they had some really unique creatures over there in the South. That's for sure.
But I think the possibility, because like even if you look at Northern California, you look at parts of Oregon, you look at British Columbia, there's just so much land out there, so many
Mhm.
woods, so many places. These
Yeah.
things could still be there and hide. Even Loch Ness. Let's be
Mhm.
realistic about that. Whatever's in Loch Ness, I mean, it may not be. Obviously, it's not the same one, but I mean, there's enough room for these things to be fruitful, as they say, fruitful and multiply.
You know, my favorite theory now too that goes for Sasquatch and also the remnant dinosaurs is that they're not necessarily remnant dinosaurs. They're dinosaurs that are misplaced in time, and that they somehow uh, came through like a time window. Because I've been reading about the Australian dinosaurs,
Hmm.
and their witnesses will often see the dinosaurs kind of disappear into thin air as almost like they were ghosts. So, maybe instead of, how people really wrestle with this concept of, well, how did this dinosaur survive? Maybe
Right.
it's more of a time space, conundrum. And same with the Sasquatch. I have a friend named Robin McCrae on Scarycast who, she says that the Sasquatch just live in another dimension and they can choose to be seen when they want to, and that's why you don't find the bodies. And it's, very interesting and very possible.
Well, I've heard stories about the Sasquatch, and the whole blue light thing,
Hmm.
and when this light appears, out they come or they disappear, or there's a fog and then they come out of the fog and they disappear. I've got a psychic that I work with my team, and she was living in Tombstone, and I guess she was doing dishes, and she said she heard a funny noise and she happened to look out the window and the T-Rex walked by
Where was this exactly?
somewhere in Tucson.
Oh, Tucson. Wow, that's cool. Okay.
And she does, and what the question is, was it a dead T Rex? Because
Mhm,
she's psychic, obviously,
mhm.
walking by, or like you say, was she at that perfect moment in time that this thing decided to appear? Because it acted like it didn't see the house. From what she
Yeah.
said, it acted like it didn't see the house or nothing. It just was leisurely walking by.
Yeah.
So I mean, anything can happen out there, and I do think maybe there is a cut in time at some point
Yeah.
for these things to come through. Or like with Nessie. I mean, who knows whatever happened to the Earth all those millions of years ago? Maybe Nessie was in a position in a
Mhm.
cave underneath everything,
Yeah.
sleeping or hibernating, and it came out of hibernation, and then wow, it's a brand new little
Yeah.
world out here. And it's been able to adapt all these years to be able to live out there.
Hmm.
What's your thoughts on, say, something like you say, you think there's time windows these things go through? What's your thoughts on something like a pterodactyl being able to survive, like in the Great Northwest woods and all that?
Yeah, so like it being able to survive as opposed to like excluding the time window theory.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I think they lie to us about our history quite a bit. I think number one, they lie. I think number two, if they're not lying, they're horribly overconfident
Hmm.
in how they think they understand the past of the world. And even a lot of these dinosaurs, from what I understand, uh, a lot of what we consider to be these really cool dinosaurs, there's not even complete skeletons for all of them.
Right.
They formulated the body off of a few bones, and people like me who don't know any better at first just take their word for it, and then
Hmm.
eventually you find out no, they only found the head, and
Right.
the scientists would just think this is what it looked like because they're so sure of themselves.
Hmm. Hmm.
So how they would survive, I don't know, unless, like I said, the history of the world is very, very different from what we've been taught.
Right. Right. And as you were saying that about the dinosaurs too, I got to thinking, you know, like you say, they take their measurements and they're calculating. And when I talked to a archaeologist or a paleontologist a few months back, he was saying, and it shocked me because I always thought maybe I'm naive, right? But you go to the museum, you see these great you see these great displays, and you think, wow, that's really cool. And like he says, there's only one or two that and then they have to piecemeal them together.
Exactly. And what if, and that's the other thing I think, what if there was only one or two and they just
Hmm.
assumed there was a whole species? What if they were created, and there was just one?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't know. That's the whole giant question mark over all this. We don't know. Let's talk about Cowboys and Aliens.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well, problem with that is there's so much yellow journalism back then. It's so
Mhm.
difficult to tell what was real and what wasn't, especially with the 1896, 1897 airship wave. Because I found a few stories that can't possibly be true, I wouldn't think, that were clearly, what would I call it, kind of journalist propaganda. Because around that time, 1897, the media really wanted America to get in the Spanish American War in
Mhm.
Cuba. And they did a bunch of stories about airships that were the airship would be seen, the airship would land, and the occupants would say, "Well, we're going to go help the Cubans and fight the Spanish."
Mhm.
And once I kind of learned more about the history of the Spanish American War and how basically there was a ship in Havana Harbor that had a might have had a it was a US ship that had like a maybe a ammunition malfunction inside the hull and sunk itself, and the press jumped the gun and claimed that the Spanish had sunk the ship and we need to go to war. And basically I'm just saying, it was just an early example of media manipulation of our current events. So just thought it was interesting that even the media jumped on these airship stories, as kind of part of the Spanish American War propaganda. And that was only
Right.
a small part of it. I was just using that as a unique example. But most of the airship stories, though, let's say the other half of them,
Mhm.
were probably true because there were just so many of them. And you have to wonder, like, was there like a secret society of newspaper writers that all got together and they decided we're going to do this big hoax? I don't know how that would have worked back then. Um, but the airships, though, of the old days, they didn't have the term UFO. Very, very few of them actually looked like what we would call UFOs today, the disc shape and all that. Most of them were basically just futuristic looking dirigibles.
Mhm.
And that's what the airship wave was of the 1890s and all that. But UFO sightings, though, in general, Noe Torres and I managed to do 4 books spanning the year 1800 all the way up to 1900, basically. Just tons and tons of UFO encounters in the Old West for sure.
And okay, like you're saying, this is the kind of thing they saw. Were there any alien sightings at all, or no?
It's kind of disappointing because a lot of the airships were just piloted by normal people.
Mhm.
And Noe, my co-author, came up with an interesting theory, and he said, "Well, what if they were were time travelers, and that's why they appeared to be human, and they were flying around in these ships that kind of looked appropriate to the era." But there were a few interesting aliens. There was a story from, I think, Michigan or somewhere, 1897, where a giant came out of a UFO and it kicked a farmer. That's kind of a famous story in UFO circles. And there's some weird aliens. I've forgotten about a lot of them
Mhm.
just because it's
Mhm.
so long ago that we did those books. But there was one, that had to be a hoax because they were pink aliens that were wearing robes like a Roman centurion, and like that one had to be made up. But
Right.
okay, you know what though? For something really good though, there was a little girl who wrote a letter to the newspaper about her dream of the airship. She dreamed that an airship came to her in the night and took her away. And she said the airship was piloted by these little men. And, back in the Old West, nobody had any concept of the gray aliens.
Mhm.
And, the newspaper published this letter just as something to publish because they thought it was cute or interesting or whatever. And ironically enough, to me, that's probably one of the best ones because it's so has all the telltale signs of like an alien abduction. Because this little
Mhm.
girl says it was a dream, but what are the odds that she saw these aliens that people today see?
Right.
Because
That's fascinating.
not a lot of alien grays in the Old West though. That was really rare. So that one really struck me as interesting. And believe it or not, there's some Men in Black uh, encounters from the Old West as well.
Really.
hmm one of these articles you would not believe because it sounds like the Men in Black, comedy films.
Mhm.
Um, these guys watched a UFO land, They claimed a man in a black suit got out of the UFO and then he hopped into his buggy, and they described his buggy as a horseless carriage. Like he rode in this buggy without any horses, and it sped away. And it kind of reminded me of in the movie how they have their special black cars that can fly.
Hmm.
So it was kind of like this man in black had a futuristic buggy he rode in,
Hmm.
which is just so strange because it's a real article. I mean,
That's
it's
crazy.
from 1875 for a fact. So
That's really incredible. I love all this stuff. I love
yeah,
all the research you've done into this. It's absolutely fascinating. I never, my wildest dreams would have thought to do anything like that.
yeah. Well, like I said, Noe and I just kind of had the same idea at the same time, and it snowballed from there. And there's a ton of weird Western history. I even started a little tiny like digest magazine. It's called Strange West. I don't know if you're an Ambrose Bierce fan.
Yes.
So yeah, I learned that Ambrose Bierce disappeared at a spot in Ojinaga, Mexico. That's close to what they call the Devil's Cave.
Hmm.
And he has that kind of unique association with the devil, and so it's kind of just a speculative piece about what are the odds that the man who wrote about the devil disappeared into thin air around this place called Devil's Cave. And but it's just a print on demand magazine. You can't really subscribe to it, but it's just
Right.
cheap entertainment, $6 or 99 cents for Kindle.
That's awesome. Now that you mentioned missing, what do you think? Um, were you able to track down, like look into any missing person cases or anything?
No, I haven't ever gotten into anything quite that serious.
Okay. Just wondering, because like you mentioned him, and I was just thinking about this missing 911 thing. I mean, I wonder if this stuff was going on. And
Mhm.
well, I guess it would be hard to track people back then.
I bet it
Back in the
was. Yeah,
West and stuff.
I
Yeah,
absolutely bet it was.
especially with the fact that they're out in the desert. There's no water, so who
Hmm.
knows?
Yeah.
Whether they would die of thirst or whatever. So what's
Mhm.
next for you?
Well, there will be plenty more of these type books. Like I said, I'm doing one called Cowboys and Saurians, Dinosaurs Down Under, which is about like the Buranjor that eats
Hmm.
cattle down there, and those I did a novel. I'm trying pretty hard to promote a Western novel. It's this one here, the noted desperado Pancho Dumez. It's all about the real life theft of Billy the Kid's tombstone in the 1970s. His tombstone was stolen several times. It's just I kind of wove a little adventure story out of that. Um, so yeah, but I've usually got about 5 or 6 books going at once, and I just jump back and forth between whichever one I want to work on that particular day.
That works. That works. And let me ask you this: growing up I mean, being living in Roswell, it must be an incredible place to decide to delve into all these legends and stuff because you're
Mhm.
surrounded by it all.
Yeah, and I think I got a little tired of the aliens, and I think that's why as a kid I gravitated more towards Bigfoot and dinosaurs. They were strange, but they were just different. You take for granted where you live, and aliens were in my face just all the time. So, but I appreciate where I live. I love it here. I really do. I think it's a great place to live.
Absolutely. I want to thank you for coming on. I so appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Charlotte. I enjoyed it.
I did too, and it'd be great to get you back on and pick your brain a little more about this
Sure.
stuff.
Anytime, just let me know.
All right, John. Thank you so
All
much. Where
right.
can
Good
people
night.
find you?
Oh, just type in my name on Amazon.com, and
Hmm.
I'll have like an author page, and there'll be lots of stuff.
Okay, fair enough. All right, John. Thank you so
All
much.
right. Thank you.
Have a good evening. All right, that was great. I learned a lot, and I was looking forward to this because I wanted to talk about all these legends and stuff. See, the legends continue even to this day about these creatures, and so who knows? I mean, maybe well, obviously these creatures were probably here a long time before we were, before we came to the Earth. Okay, guys, quick reminder: I'm going to be teaching a psychic development class on Saturday, September 3rd. Let me straighten up a little bit here. I keep sinking in my chair. I need a new chair. Uh, I'll be teaching the Second Development Class 1 on Saturday, September 3rd at 5 p.m. Pacific. And then the following Saturday, September 10th, I'm teaching another Second Development class at 5 p.m. Pacific, and that's a Second Development Class 2. And again, you can check that out at our meetup. And this California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team meetup. You can check that out over there. It's free to it's free to join that meetup, no cost. But I do charge for the classes because everything we do is nonprofit. So like with John, whatever donations come in, like even for, with his books, and just like whatever donations come in for what we do here, that goes towards maintaining the paranormal team, and that goes towards maintaining the equipment here, the cameras and everything we got here to keep the show on the air. So if you're interested in taking a development class or two, that's great. I would really appreciate that. Again, I'd appreciate it. Tomorrow we're going to be on at noon Pacific. We're shifting gears again. We're going to be on noon Pacific. Tomorrow is JT Hunter's going to be with us talking about the Gainesville Ripper. And he's got a great book on that, 20 awards and everything. So he's going to be with us talking about that. But remember, that's going to be at noon. But of course, it'll be available for everybody in the evenings that are our usual evening viewers. If you like the show, share it with 5 people. If you hated the show, share it with 5 people. We are equal opportunity here at California Haunts Radio. Also, if you're watching from Facebook right now and you like what you see, hit that follow button. Same thing with TikTok and Twitch and even Twitter. All right? Hit that follow button. You're watching from YouTube, go ahead and subscribe. I can't think of things tonight. If you're watching from YouTube, go ahead and subscribe. And there's all kinds of stuff on there, all kinds of videos, including this gentleman's stuff. Okay? Anyway, I want to thank you all for coming tonight. And again, I really appreciate everything you've done. The numbers have jumped, like I said earlier, the numbers have jumped through the roof. And I hope they keep going that way. People are catching on. And I got an email the other day from somebody in France, which I'm really cool about. I'm going to post that on the website, I think, because it's just something you don't see every day. So you can visit us at CaliforniaHauntsRadio.com or the paranormal team at CaliforniaHaunts.org. All right. Anyway, again, you see that ticker at the bottom of the page, and that's to help us bring, help us keep bringing exciting and informative guests to the show. Please donate. If you have it, you're available to help us out a little bit. Internet costs and all that good stuff. Like I said earlier, PayPal.com at California Haunts, or if you're uncomfortable with PayPal, Venmo at California Haunts. All right. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some of his books, some of John's books, and of course, getting them on Amazon. So here we go. You can check it out website, roswellbooks.com. And of course, Monsters of the Old South, Cowboys and Vampires. Mummies of the Americas. I'm blind, so I can't read that one. It's a UFO thing. Okay, then we got... I'm sorry about that, John. Space Monsters of the Old West. That's what happens when you get old and you're blind. Too much computer work. And of course, you can get those at Amazon or at that RoswellBooks.com site. All right. Anyway, I want to thank everybody for coming tonight, and I will see you at noon tomorrow. So have a good evening, guys.